Apple Pay in this edition of Accrual World. Tom, do you use Apple Pay?
I use Apple Pay all the time. It's on my phone. I don't carry a wallet. I don't go to shops. I use Apple Pay for, 25%, 30% of my income goes through Apple Pay.
And I'm similar. It means that I don't have to remember my wallet. I go out and I can just tap away with this. And I've always got my phone with me because I'm using it to answer my students' questions. So, Apple Pay, why are we talking about them, Tom?
Well, in May 2022, Apple Pay was the subject of an initial investigation by the European Union in respect of an antitrust investigation.
Okay, and what was going on here is, well, if you want to pay using your phone and you have an Apple phone, you can only use Apple Pay. There's no other third-party provider that's allowed access.
And that's in contrast to Android. If you've got an Android phone, you can use a variety of different payment platforms. So Apple have created their little internal monopoly.
Yeah, and you can see why they've done it. Right? So Apple Pay currently accounts for 5% of global card transactions, and it's forecast to grow to 10% by 2025. And on each of those transactions, Apple will be making something like 1.6, 1.8% as their slice of the transactions.
That's a massive amount of money.
Vast numbers. And of course they want to keep that money just for them. But what's their justification?
The justification is security. Their justification is data breach. They argue that if they allowed other apps, other payment platforms onto their system, somehow the customers and the consumer data would be, there will be a risk of integrity.
Okay, so they're saying in the customer's interests, we can't allow third-party providers. It must be us. We're the only ones who can safely take this huge slice of revenue. Okay.
Yeah, that's their defence. But the European Union are there on behalf of a government to protect the interests of the consumers. And the argument is, from the European point of view, that it's anti-competitive. And the European Union the European Commission have got proper track record on this. So back in 2016, they fined some truck makers 2.9 billion euros because they were operating a cartel to maximise the price. It wasn't fair competition.
Yeah, and so the fines can be vast here. This is a regulator with teeth. Apple's worldwide revenues are about $275 billion, and the potential fine is up to 10% of that. So knocking on $28 billion, potentially, if they're found guilty.
So what Ben has just done there is come up with a reliable measure of what the amount of the fine could be.
Okay, it's a great segue into what this series is actually about, which is accounting and auditing issues. So the accounting issue then, let's say that Apple's next year ends in September. Let's say that this case hasn't been decided by then.
Oh, it won't have been decided by then because this is going to go on and on and on. It's a complex case.
Okay, so what happens? Sure. What's the financial reporting?
Well, let's think about the International Accounting Standard 37 that deals with provisions. So a provision is a liability of uncertain timing or amount. So it's clear that it's not certain exactly if Apple will have to pay a fine and how much they're going to have to pay a fine.
Okay, but there's various stages to it. If you're going to have a provision, it needs to be a past event?
Yeah, there's three conditions.
Yeah.
So there has to be a present obligation arising from a past event, which is either legal or constructive. And I think that condition is probably met because they have already set this thing up. They've already done what they've done.
The crime has been committed.
Yeah, so the past event is there. But it also has to be a reliable measure as to how much money, because if we're going to make a debit or credit, we need a number. But the third criteria is probable.
Okay.
Is there going to be a probable payment? Is it probable that Apple are going to lose this case and therefore have to pay the money out?
Okay, and you can be certain that Apple have got probably the finest of fine legal teams that are going to be fighting this tooth and nail, and may well be very confident in their defence, this security and privacy defence. So it could be a provision if it's deemed probable, but it seems unlikely.
But if it's only possible, then it will be a disclosure in the notes. So there will be information in the notes to allow investors to make their own mind up, but the published earnings won't have been damaged and the balance sheet liability won't be increased.
Okay,
if
so
you just make a note.
We just have a contingent liability with the disclosure of all the details of the case, so a user of the accounts can kind of form their own opinion of it, and including the potential liability.
Form their own opinion.
Yeah.
Shouldn't the auditors be forming an opinion? And what work would you be doing in that situation?
Okay, so the auditors, for me, this comes under non-compliance with laws and regulations. Right? And although we were talking there about Apple's next set of accounts, I'm going to take a step back for the audit angle here and go, well, over the last few years, Apple Pay has clearly, well, possibly been breaching competition rules by this ring fencing, right? And the auditors have a responsibility to identify and report any clear non-compliance with laws and regulations. So this is something the auditors should have been challenging management about and potentially reporting.
Well, they would certainly know their business model, wouldn't they? I mean, an auditor has to know their client,
Yeah.
and an auditor has to understand the business model. So there's no way the auditor doesn't know about this ring fencing.
Yeah. But the issue comes into as how clear a breach of laws and regs is this? Right, so let's use a more extreme example. Let's say that Apple, in the manufacture of these phones, is using children, right? Young children, because those small hands are so useful for doing all the components. I'm making a silly example. But where it is clearly a breach of laws and regulations, legal working age of, let's say 16, and they're using 6-year-olds, then that's the kind of thing that's an egregious, clear breach, and the auditors would have a clear responsibility to report that to the authorities.
Yeah, and it'd be a very cruel world to have a 4-year-old, 6-year-old working on the phones, wouldn't it?
Indeed, and I'm not saying that's been happening. But something like this that's more subjective, well, let's say that the auditors, Ernst & Young, are Apple's auditors. Let's say Ernst & Young, in these meetings with management, are challenging them on the legality of their business model. And Apple management come back and say, look, here is a fancy, official legal opinion from our legal team, setting out the law here, and setting out why our privacy and data protection angle is actually a reason that this is okay. We've got this official-looking document from our lawyers that state this.
Well, that's presumably exactly what happened,
Yeah. And then, so as the auditors, you've then got two choices. Right? Choice one is you accept this explanation and you've got robust third-party evidence.
You not only accept the explanation, but you accept the audit fee as well,
and
don't you?
the audit fee that Ernst & Young are earning from this. Audit fee is about $17.5 million a year, and they make about another $4 or $5 million in non-audit work.
That's
so
quite
option one, accept it and keep getting your $22 million of fees. Option two, robust defence or whatever, challenge of management, and dig your heels in, and you report it, and you burn the relationship with Apple, and you very likely don't get reappointed as the auditor next year, and you lose your $22 million of fees. As the audit partner on that engagement, it would be, you have a clear, this is a structural weakness in the audit market. You have a clear self-interest threat that you financially, you need this company to retain you, to keep paying these healthy fees. It's a very principled auditor that on such a subjective matter really digs their heels in.
Yeah.
Can't see it happening.
No, I can't see it happening either. And it didn't happen, did it?
Well, not that we know of.
Yeah.
So it seems that Ernst & Young accepted Apple's explanation, and actually when you review Apple's accounts, this is not even listed as one of their clear risks in their financial statements. They've got a big risk register, and this is, non-compliance with laws and regulations is just mentioned very obliquely.
Yeah.
Nothing about this particular case.
Maybe the EU will get egg on its face and not succeed. We don't know at this stage, do we, Ben?
Who knows? It's interesting, and we wait to find out. But it will be a cruel world for Apple if they do get this $27 million fine.
That's 1-1.